I'm Tori, and today I'm going to be discussing The Mortal Engines by Reeve. This book was written in 2001, and I listened to the audiobook narrated by Barnaby Edwards. I read this book because it's being adapted into a movie, and I saw a trailer for the movie that looked absolutely amazing, so I thought I would go ahead and read the book. It takes place in a distant future that has a very cool steampunk aesthetic. So it's kind of Victorian with all this cool clockwork and like gas and coal powered stuff going on. And basically the premise of this book is that long ago it didn't become viable for cities to exist as they were, so they became mobile, and now they're these giant mechanical monstrosities that roam over the world. And if a city finds a smaller city, it will eat it and consume all of its resources and recycle all of its materials to be used to feed itself. And it just seemed like this great, cool aesthetic. I loved all the ambiance, the atmosphere was amazing, the setting was amazing, the way all the costumes and everything like that was described was just amazing. The only things I wasn't fond of were basically the characters and the plot. The characters seemed fairly bland and forgettable, and the plot wasn't overly exciting. So I'm going to start talking about some of the opinions I have about this book. So if you want to read it, go do that, and then come back to hear what I have to say. My favorite thing about this book was the world, so I'm going to go ahead and talk about that first. I really liked the general concept, but I wish that they had spent more time explaining it. I had a lot of questions for how this world works. So it's someplace in the distant future, and none of our computer parts work, but they figured out mechanical stuff and steam-powered stuff, and they have hot air balloons all over the place. So it sounds like the reason cities became mobile was because of like earthquakes and other natural disasters. They dropped some line about that. And I want to know how this is sustainable and how there aren't any more like permanent non-moving settlements. So as far as I could tell, in Europe and maybe more continents, all the cities just kind of roam around and are mobile, and then there's some kind of a barrier, and then you get over into Asia and there are settled on the ground cities and groups of people, as far as I could tell. So what I want to know is, how are resources divided in this world? Because this is a world where everyone's always talking about they need cities to prey on, they're running out of resources. And so what I gather is that those resources are like metal and machinery and different pieces to keep their cities running. But fuel doesn't seem to be much of an issue. They talk about fuel a little bit when they're going faster than they should. They start to run low on fuel, but it sounds like if they maintain normal speeds, they've managed to use waste products as fuel, so fuel isn't really an issue. Another thing no one ever talks about is food. These cities are starving for metal and resources like that, but none of the people have to worry about eating at all, and food is just completely abundant. And it's really hard for me to imagine a society where you have all the food you need. They don't really talk about, anything that comes from plants needing, fibers to make clothing or anything like that. All they need is metal to keep their city moving. And they have the anti-tractionists who think that moving cities are immoral and want to stop them. But it seems to me like moving cities are impractical. And people have enough food, they have enough of everything. The only resources they're lacking are the resources that keeps the cities moving. So they would just naturally die out. And it's kind of amazing to me that they still exist and that this is much of an issue. It is said, that a lot of food is grown from like algae and things like that. But I have a hard time believing that if resources are so abundant and food is so plentiful and the only resources lacking are metal, that people would be as unhappy as they are. And I want to know why metal has been exhausted. Why doesn't anyone ever stop and mine? Is the ground completely depleted and there are no metal deposits left in all of Europe? It's very strange to me. I want to know what happened to make food perfectly available. We have all the food we need, yet somehow metal has been completely depleted, because it seems like people tend to need a lot more food than they do metal, and I want to know how this came to pass. Oh, and then another thing about this world I have questions about is, how do pirates work? Because basically they talk about urban Darwinism, or how cities are supposed to want to go feed on each other and it's every city for themselves and let's all attack. But then they meet a pirate city and they don't follow the rules. because they attack cities and plunder all their stuff and kill people. And I guess the other cities don't kill people, they just enslave them and put them in horrible working conditions so they'll die soon, so I guess pirates are a little worse. But I really didn't see how this world could have scary pirates in it when basically every single person is a pirate. So basically I've spent the whole book being very interested in all these questions about how the world worked, and I barely cared about the characters. The main character, Tom, whose name I actually had to look up for this review because I forgot it the second the story was over, was just the most bland and ignorant, naive, annoying character. He was surprised by everything. He didn't understand how people could be lying to him, and why was the world such a cruel place, and everything was a shock. And how could Valentine be evil when he had been his mentor? And I got so sick of spending time with Tom. He just annoyed me. And Hester wasn't much better. I mean, she had an interesting backstory and interesting motivations, but then her actual character was pretty bland too. And I know throughout this book we were supposed to be very excited to be following Tom and Hester on all their little adventures and all the quirky characters they're meeting. But somehow I just could never get invested in their story. I didn't care about their little adventures. The characters seemed not all that memorable to me, and I just didn't care. I didn't care about the pirate ships or who betrayed them, or it didn't matter to me. And I could tell it was pretty bad when the character I liked most and was most rooting for was Shrike, who was going to try to track everyone down and kill them. I'm like, okay, Shrike, you're my favorite character. You are the most interesting person I want to follow. Let's see if you can catch those people and kill them. I hope you succeed. It was the only one I cared about, and that is not good. Valentine could have been an interesting villain, but he was very strange. So Valentine started out as this evil, mustache-twirling villain who happily murdered children. And then, 3/4 of the way through the book, we discover that he was just kind of confused, and he was listening to bad people, and he didn't really know that it wasn't okay to murder people and keep trying to murder children, and he was just misunderstood, and we should sympathize with him. It wasn't his fault when he's been running around doing all these horrible things, murdering people left and right. And he's like, oh, gee, well, my daughter thinks it's not okay to murder people, so maybe I should stop murdering people. But then, at the end, when he sees Hester again, his first thought is, I should murder her! Even though his daughter already knows he has nothing to gain from murdering Hester. She can kill him, but apart from that, she can't really do anything to him. She's going to be detained. She's already, in custody. She can't hurt him at all, and he just goes right back to killing people. But we're still supposed to feel sorry for him, and like he was just misguided and didn't know what he was doing. That made no sense to me. The only characters I was kind of okay with were Catherine and Bevis, and that was just because they seemed the least annoying. I was having fun watching their story arc, but they were kind of bland. And then out of nowhere they have this insta-love where they're saying, oh, I love you too, when they're more at the point of, oh, I might have a little crush on you. They've barely known each other for a few days. And then later we find out that that's just because they're going to die. And that was actually my favorite part of the book. I loved it that those characters died. At first they killed Dog, and I was shocked and a little bit horrified, but you could tell I really wasn't liking this book because I didn't feel that bad about it. And I always hate it when the animal dies, so I was really not invested in this story to not care that this big, beautiful wolf has just been killed. And then we're going along, and Bevis is injured and knocked down, thinking, okay, he'll get up, but then they make it very clear that he's actually dead. And then Catherine actually dies, and I was just loving it. And I thought it was so great because usually this is, I think, maybe like a middle grade or maybe early young adult novel. And usually in these kinds of books, you just go on a fun little adventure story, and you don't have to worry about people actually dying, but they're actually killing characters off, and I was loving that. And then the entire city of London just blew up, and everybody on there died, and it was kind of what I'd been hoping for the whole story. And I know this series goes on, but I just kind of think of this as a compact story. It's like a tragedy. You see people wandering around, going on their little stupid adventures, and then the whole city blows up. The end! Problem solved! And I was actually kind of okay with this ending, because I didn't care about the characters at all. I had been kind of rooting for Shrike to win. I'm a little curious about what his identity was, but I feel like the reveal won't be worth all the hype they were building up. And so then the city was destroyed and everyone died at the end. I'm really okay with that, and it actually made me like the story a lot more than I was liking it. So I'm not going to read any of the other books in the series. I'm going to treat this as a standalone novel, and I'm actually kind of glad I read it, because I was annoyed with all these characters. Then I had this cathartic thing where most people died, and Tom and Hester did survive, but in my mind they're going to go off on some other little adventure and just fade into obscurity, and we will never have to worry about them again. So basically, I was not a huge fan of this book, though I did love the aesthetic. I think that a lot of the problems I have with the book are things that could be fixed in an adaptation, so I definitely want to go see the movie. I did kind of enjoy this book when I think of it as a standalone book where basically everyone just died in the end and the city blew up. So I'm very happy in my own little world of tragedy and nothing left but a plume of smoke.